When other survival experts were still gnawing on grass belts, Ed Stafford was already enjoying halibut sashimi. Such a luxurious treat was so delicious it made him roll his eyes. Besides that, he also found a dead wild deer. Not only did he gain a handmade deerskin coat, but he also enjoyed charcoal-grilled venison skewers, tender inside and crispy outside. What was supposed to be a serious survival challenge unexpectedly turned into a food show again. In this episode, Ed Stafford will face one of his rare revenge matches. His opponent is the so-called son of nature, Matt. This guy's ability can be said to be the pinnacle of the survival world. 3 years ago, in the Mongolian Gobi Desert, wearing just a pair of flip-flops, he utterly crushed Ed Stafford, who didn't even get a whiff of his dust. In this episode, the two will face off again in the wilderness of Scotland. The route was designed by the Chinese survival expert, Teddy. They will simultaneously start from the lighthouse, cross the wild Scottish highlands along the way, and finally traverse a wide bay. The finish line is a snowy mountain behind the bay. The first to arrive will win. Considering the extreme cold here, along with the continuous drizzle, aside from a survival knife each, they also have a raincoat as their starting equipment. With all preparations ready, as Wei Qiang gave the order, the two quickly jumped into the water and sprinted toward the shore. After coming ashore, Matt decided to follow the ridge on the right. This being his first time tackling such a rocky environment, his usual advantage in running was completely negated. In contrast, Ed Stafford chose the ridge on the left. Having trained in such terrain during his military service, he was exceptionally experienced in dealing with this kind of environment. It didn't take him long to successfully reach the mountaintop. Using the principle of the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, after some analysis, Ed Stafford quickly determined the direction of the target and immediately set off toward it. And Matt found a shoal on his way forward. He immediately decided to go down there to find something to fill his stomach. As expected, as soon as he went down, he found a green belt. The leaves of these moneygrass are rich in minerals. They can be said to be top-notch ingredients in the survival world. So Matt plucked a few leaves and directly stuffed them into his mouth. After eating, he soon picked up a fishing line with a hook. Then he happily packed it up and took it away. Seeing that the seawater was about to rise with the tide, there was no time for excessive searching. He had no choice but to leave quickly. Ed Stafford also found a beach after a long trek. Considering that it would be difficult to find food deep inland, he wanted to catch some fish now to satisfy his hunger. Then he found small iron pieces all over the beach. He picked one and planned to use it as a fish hook. In addition, he even picked up a bullet. No surprise. This should have been left over from the military training at that time. After pulling off the bullet head, he found that the gunpowder inside was intact. Although this thing was not very useful for starting a fire, it was quite perfect as a combustion accelerant. Then he dug up a spruce root to use as a fishing line. Then he used a hunting knife to process the iron piece into a fish hook. As for bait, he caught an unfortunate little crab and hung it on the hook. The other end of the rope was buried in the sand to fix it. In this way, the fishing line would not be washed away when the tide rose at night. No surprise, his breakfast for the next day would be secured. After finishing all this, he turned around and went back to his old job with a burning stick. With the help of the gunpowder, Ed Stafford didn't take much time to start a small flame. To avoid getting his beautiful hair wet from the rain at night, he finally built a simple shelter with a rain poncho. And Matt triggered an old injury on his foot while running, causing his foot to be in severe pain now. Therefore, he had no choice but to seek medical help from outside the field. 2.5 hours later, the veterinarian guy slowly appeared with a medical kit. After a checkup, he couldn't find anything wrong. Finally, he just bound the foot with a bandage and left it at that. As for tonight, Matt decided to spend the night against the rock wall. As the night slowly fell, time came to the next day in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, Ed Stafford got up early to check the trap. When he got close, he really saw that an unfortunate guy had been caught. Judging from the appearance, it was obvious that part of it had been eaten by the water tower. Of course, the hungry Ed Stafford didn't care about how much meat there was. He didn't have time to take it back to the camp. He started a fire, cut off a piece, and directly put it into his mouth. He chewed vigorously. After taking a bite, he found that this thing was simply outrageous. Except for the fishy and disgusting taste, there were basically no other drawbacks. But thinking that it was rich in 50% of the protein of beef, Ed Stafford still ate it very happily. After a simple breakfast, he started to head towards the finish line, and Matt was also blocked by a gully at this time. Not wanting to waste too much time by taking a detour, he could only go down first, and then find a place to climb up. Unexpectedly, as soon as he went down, he found fresh water on the rock wall. Without thinking twice, he pressed his forehead against it and started drinking. In this way, he managed to drink half full. Then, after walking a few steps, he picked up a piece of iron ore. The sparks produced by its collision, combined with the effect of some fungi, were equivalent to carrying a lighter with him. Then he continued to move forward along the canyon. At the same time, Ed Stafford entered a woodland. On the way, he found some chaga mushrooms on a birch tree. He planned to light this thing, to store the fire. While he was still marveling at his good luck, after passing through the small grove, a lake suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking his way. Looking at the end of the lake that he couldn't see at a glance, he estimated that by the time he got around it, everything would be too late. After a visual estimation, the width of the lake was about 900 meters. After thinking for 2.5 minutes, he finally decided to cross the lake. But before that, he had to ignite the chaga mushrooms first, so that he could start a fire in time after going ashore, to avoid hypothermia. To avoid running out of energy and sinking halfway through swimming, he turned around and found some dry grass, and made a floating device with the rain poncho, to increase buoyancy. After everything was ready, he held the fire and set off towards the opposite shore. Although he had been mentally prepared, he was still frozen and kept exclaiming. At the same time, he had to make sure that the fire in his hand didn't get wet. About 40 minutes later, Ed Stafford finally made it to the shore smoothly. He only felt that his whole body had been frozen to the point of numbness. His top priority was to quickly find firewood and light a bonfire. Fortunately, the fire starter hadn't gotten wet. As expected, without any surprises, the fire starter produced a small flame. With the bonfire lit, he couldn't help but break into a smile again. Next, he planned to rest here for the night and continue his journey the next morning, after his clothes were dried by the fire. On the other side, after a long trek, Matt also entered a jungle. As soon as he entered, he found a wild stream, and also discovered a willow tree by the bank. The willow contained salicylic acid, which had anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving effects. Matt ate some of it, hoping it would help with the injury on his foot. Seeing that it was getting dark, he quickly chose an auspicious spot under a rock, and planned to set up camp there for the night. Then he went to chop some tree trunks to build the frame of a shelter. As for the roofing material, it was the ubiquitous moss. This stuff could not only shield from wind and rain, but also be used as a mattress. Of course, to have a good night's sleep, a bonfire was naturally indispensable. In terms of lighting a fire, Matt was quite experienced. He almost didn't spend much time, before easily producing a small flame. After finishing everything, he made a lure rod using a fishing line he had picked up. Then he transformed into an angler, preparing to catch a fish for a meat meal. After waiting for an unknown amount of time, he finally caught a fish. He quickly brought it back to the campsite, heated up the oil in a pan, and started a wild stew over a high flame. The next second, Matt enjoyed a nutritious meal with a satisfied look on his face. The familiar recipe, the same taste, it couldn't be more authentic. With the calories provided by this fish, beating Ed Stafford would be a piece of cake. In the blink of an eye, it was the third day. Both of them got up early and continued their journey forward. Judging from the map, Ed Stafford's progress was far ahead at present, and at this time, the terrain began to become steep. Helplessly, Ed Stafford had to grab the weeds to pull himself up the climb. Halfway through, he slipped and almost dropped out of the competition. Only then did he successfully reach the top. Arriving at the mountaintop, while admiring the beautiful scenery, he also saw the snow-capped mountain, the endpoint of this competition. To avoid wasting unnecessary physical energy by repeatedly going up and down the mountain, he planned to move forward directly along the ridge line. Meanwhile, the injury on Matt's foot had improved. With a full recovery, he directly went into a frenzy mode. After a day of sprinting, he also saw the snow-capped mountain, the endpoint, at this time. However, seeing that it was getting dark, and the temperature was gradually dropping, he could only stop his journey, and went to the woods at the foot of the mountain to seek shelter. Soon, he found a huge oak tree, and just below the roots, there was a wild tree hole. Such a perfect, auspicious spot was simply too good to pass up sleeping here for a night. Then he turned around and carried stones over to build a windbreak wall. After that, he spent a few minutes finding a Fomes fomentarius on the tree. He used the sparks produced by colliding it with iron ore to start a fire. Half an hour later, the fungus finally emitted a wisp of smoke. After putting in some dry grass, he successfully blew out a small flame in no time. At the same time, Ed Stafford was still hurriedly looking for a campsite. At this moment, the sand martins hovering in the sky caught his attention. Based on his experience, there should be some kind of animal carcass nearby. As expected, he soon found a dead red deer, which had a hole gnawed by an eagle. At the same time, it was accompanied by a rotten smell that went straight to the top of his head. Judging from the cloudiness of its eyes, it had been dead for at least more than 3 days. He skinned it, and planned to make clothes out of it. Of course, the deer meat couldn't be wasted either. Although it smelled a bit strange, putting the smell aside, It was an excellent source of protein. He then cut 2 pieces, wrapped them in the deerskin, and took them away. As for Matt's dinner today, it's just some clover. He directly plucked a big handful and stuffed it into his mouth. It tastes sour, a bit like lemon. It's not exactly delicious, but fortunately, it has far more vitamins than beef. In contrast, Ed Stafford has already started roasting venison and takes a bite. After eating and drinking his fill, he spends the night like this. As time comes to the 4th day, Matt has gradually adapted to the local environment by now. He still keeps running non-stop all the way, but Ed Stafford still maintains a slight lead. After a period of head-down trekking, he is the first to reach the bay. To avoid almost freezing solid like last time, he decides to spend some time building a raft. First, he inserts sticks into the ground as a frame. Then, he winds branches around the sticks in circles. Finally, he wraps and secures the whole thing with a rain poncho. Soon, a wilderness raft successfully launches into the water. Then he happily paddles towards the opposite shore. At this time, Matt also arrives at the shore closely behind. Of course, he also sees Ed Stafford, who is struggling to paddle. Matt immediately shouts for Ed Stafford to wait for him. Upon hearing the voice, Ed Stafford looks back and is instantly in a great hurry. His hand movements also speed up a bit. Seeing that his opponent is in the lead, Matt is also extremely anxious. He quickly picks up 2 deadwoods on the shore, simply processes them into makeshift surfboards, and then hurriedly lies on top of them and sets off. Currently, there is only a 50-meter gap between the 2 of them. Ed Stafford, who reaches the shore first, steps on the gas and starts running. Soon, Matt also arrives on the shore closely behind. To avoid exposing his whereabouts, he chooses to take another route. In this way, the 2 of them keep walking until it gradually gets dark. On the way, Ed Stafford discovers something good on the ground again. It seems to be wool left after a sheep has rotted. He immediately decides to use this to make himself a hat. Then he finds a good spot to set up camp. While it's still not dark, he makes himself a genuine leather coat out of deerskin. After putting it on, the warmth effect is simply superb. As for Matt, he just uses the sky as his blanket and the ground as his bed, and falls asleep right away. In the blink of an eye, time comes to the 5th day. The wool that Ed Stafford cut yesterday has been roasted dry, so he directly puts it on top of his head to keep his bald head warm. The perfect warmth effect also makes him laugh heartily. At the same time, Matt is also making preparations for the final sprint. He takes off his outer pants to reduce wind resistance while running, and then tears off the rain poncho to make leggings, to prevent snow from getting into his shoes. Then he steps on the gas and heads towards the finish line. Thinking of Matt's almost insane strength, Ed Stafford also doesn't dare to slack off at all, and goes all out. As the 2 of them gradually move upwards and get closer and closer to the finish line, at this time, Teddy at the finish line also sees a figure. Upon getting closer, it's exactly Ed Stafford, who is fully armed in deerskin. When he learns that he is the first to arrive, before he even has time to be happy, he sees Matt also appearing in his line of sight closely behind. Wow, he truly deserves to be one of the 3 emperors in the survival world. If it weren't for the recurrence of an old injury on his foot, it's really hard to say who would win. As the most authentic outdoor food-eating streamer first in the whole network, Ed Stafford can always come up with something new no matter where he goes. This time in Taiwan, China, he even gets to eat wilderness-style meat-filled zongzi. Taking a bite, it's truly mouth-watering, nutritious and healthy. The challenge location for this episode is located at Shengxian Valley in Taiwan, China, and this time's challenge opponent is Ed Stafford's old acquaintance, Ness. Not only is she an adventurer and survival expert, but she is also Ed Stafford's nominal godmother. Despite this, Ed Stafford doesn't plan to go easy on her. Ness also firmly believes that she will be the first female contestant to win. This competition is approximately 70 kilometers in total. Along the way, they need to pass through rocky valleys and dense primeval forests. The finish line is located at a suspension bridge above a riverbed. As usual, whoever reaches first wins. The 2 are only allowed to carry a hunting knife. The competition referee is Teddy, the Taiwan branch's strongman. As the referee gives the order, the 2 jump into the water and officially start the competition. Since it's the rainy season locally, the river is in flood, which also adds quite a lot of difficulties to them. After getting ashore, Ness decides to go directly downstream along the river, while Ed Stafford, who is not good at water, plans to enter the jungle. Little does he know that what awaits him ahead is another even more turbulent river. Unexpectedly, at this time, the sky also starts pouring with rain. Instantly, the ground becomes extremely muddy and incredibly slippery. This makes him start to wonder if he chose the wrong route. In contrast, it wasn't raining on Ness's side. However, the rocky riverbed made her journey difficult. and she also had to be on the lookout for falling rocks from the mountains that could take her out instantly. At the same time, Ed Stafford also crossed over a hill and reached another river. Unlike Ness, he needed to go upstream along the riverbank. Yet, after just a few steps, he was blocked by a waterfall. He initially planned to climb up directly from the side, but the rocky cliff was slippery. One slight misstep and he'd be in serious trouble. After a moment of thought, he decided to make a ladder. At this time, the bamboo growing all over the mountains came in extremely handy. Based on the Pythagorean theorem that triangles are stable, he used tree vines paired with bamboo to quickly make a triangular bamboo ladder. After finishing, he stepped on the ladder and easily climbed up onto the rocks. This made Ed Stafford so happy that tears almost welled up. On the other side, Ness was currently in the lead. During her trek, she didn't forget to gather some supplies. The bark of this paper mulberry tree has extremely high toughness, making it a perfect choice to use as a rope. Of course, these small rivers were also rich in protein. As soon as she finished speaking, she caught an underage little crab. Without further ado, she directly threw it into her mouth, shell and all. It was crunchy. Unexpectedly, the taste of this little thing was quite good. Although it was small, it was fortunate that it had far more protein than beef. As the sky gradually grew darker and the rain kept getting heavier, Ness immediately decided to leave the river and find a place to set up camp. Not long after entering the jungle, she found a rock cave. Such a prime spot. Would be a pity not to spend the night there, so she quickly gathered palm leaves and laid them on the ground as a mattress. Next, she had to quickly get a fire going to warm herself up. She quickly made a torch using vines. All she needed to do was grasp both ends and rub them rapidly to create sparks. However, it seemed simple, but in reality, it wasn't easy at all. After just a few rubs, she was so tired that she was almost out of breath. Finally, after the vines were rubbed raw, there were finally sparks. Then she put the sparks into a fire dragon, a fire-starting device, and soon blew out a small flame. At the same time, Ed Stafford was also busy building a shelter. He used bamboo to construct a roof frame. To avoid getting his beautiful hair wet from the rain at night, he covered the top with leaves as tiles in layers. With a roof, of course, a bed was also necessary. After finishing, he went to scrape some bamboo shavings to use as a stove. Then he held bamboo pieces and rubbed them rapidly to create small sparks. Finally, he completed all of this before nightfall. In this way, the two of them lay in their respective shelters and spent the first night. In the blink of an eye, the next day arrived. By the fire, Ed Stafford had slept extremely comfortably last night. Just as he was preparing to continue on his way, he found a cricket crawling on his hand that didn't know where to go. This was protein delivered right to his doorstep. Not eating it would be a waste. This thing was a definite high-protein snack, just right to solve his breakfast problem for the day. After some chewing, he found that the taste was surprisingly good. Not satisfied after eating, he caught dozens more nearby and stuffed them into his pocket. Of course, eating only meat and no vegetables wasn't good. This tree is called the guanglong tree, a plant unique to Taiwan. The white part of its heartwood is an edible growth. It would have higher nutritional value if cooked before eating, so he quickly made a steamer out of bamboo. Then he mixed the crickets and the heartwood together, wrapped them up with banana leaves, and soon had several wilderness-style meat-filled zongzi. A dozen or so minutes later, the delicious food was ready. Opening it up, it was steaming hot, and really looked the part. Taking a bite, he had a big smile on his face. This was what you called a proper meat and vegetable combination. In its original flavor, with every bite full of calories, Ed Stafford, who had been hungry, couldn't stop praising it, claiming that this was the best food he had ever made in his many years of survival. After eating and drinking his fill, he stepped on the gas and continued on his way. At the same time, after trekking all morning, Ness encountered a large-scale and severe landslide ahead, and rocks were occasionally rolling down from the mountains. Not wanting to take the risk, she could only bypass it through the jungle on the side. However, this journey wasn't as easy as imagined. Either there were thorns all over the ground or she encountered dead-end paths. She could only keep moving forward with determination. At this time, Ed Stafford was also blocked by a waterfall. He moved closer to take a look, but couldn't find any chance to climb up at all. Helpless, he could only turn back the way he came and find a way around. Just as he was complaining incessantly, a nearby cave happened to catch his attention. The light inside proved there must be an exit, so without another word, he started crawling in. Perhaps with a bit of luck, he could reach the top of the previous waterfall. After passing through the cave, a pool of water appeared before him. Continuing forward, the space became increasingly narrow. By the end, only his bald head was above the water. Fortunately, Ed Stafford, relying on his solid skills, successfully got out of the dangerous situation. Feeling as if a heavy burden had been lifted, he also saw the cave exit. When he went over to look, outside, a heavy rain had started again, and before he knew it, it was night once more. Rather than go out and get soaked by the rain, it was better to just endure the night inside the cave. As for Ness, she built a shelter in the jungle, using tree bark. After finishing, she slept straight through until the next morning. Unexpectedly, there was a surprise when she woke up. It turned out that last night, a beauty rat snake had slithered into her shelter. However, since this creature is a protected animal in Taiwan, she could only helplessly let it go. On the other side, Ed Stafford also managed to hold on until dawn. The high-intensity exercise from the previous day left him starving early in the morning, so he gathered bamboo, intending to make a spear to see if he could catch a fish. Then, taking a deep breath, he dove into the water. After a great deal of effort and numerous failed attempts along the way, he finally succeeded in catching a small pufferfish half an hour later. Although he was shivering intensely from the cold, the outcome was well worth it. Without time to start a fire or heat oil, he directly started eating the flesh raw like sashimi. Apart from being slightly unpalatable, it had no other drawbacks, but fortunately, it could replenish a tiny bit of calories for his body. At this time, Ness was trying every possible way to get back to the river. Unfortunately, there were cliffs and steep walls everywhere, which made her somewhat distraught. With no other option, she had to waste a lot of time detouring. Meanwhile, Ed Stafford, who was lagging behind, used this opportunity to slowly overtake her. In the end, Ness spent almost the entire day just getting back to the water's edge. Unexpectedly, shortly after returning to the water and not having gone far, a waterfall appeared prominently before her, blocking the way. Fortunately, there were many sturdy vines growing nearby, so she decisively chose to use the vines to descend. In the end, and entirely unsurprisingly, she reached the bottom of the cliff. After getting ashore, she excitedly let out the same hearty laugh as Ed Stafford. As another day was about to end, Ed Stafford started gathering materials to build a shelter. Unexpectedly, he used too much force and ended up flying out completely. Then he gathered some weeds and spread them on the ground as a mattress. After finishing, he just casually covered it with tree bark, and the job was done. Compared to Ed Stafford's rather makeshift coffin house, the shelter Ness was building could be said to be quite exquisite. After finishing, she even wove a basket from vines. She planned to use this basket later to catch fish in the river. Ed Stafford, lying inside his shelter at this time, was very worried about Ness. He just hoped her situation wasn't too miserable. After all, the relationship between the two was already like family. Meanwhile, Ness was by the river, planning to use the woven basket to catch fish. She tied the basket to a lever with a torch, using the phototaxis of the creatures to attract the fish. When the fish came, she would lift the basket. There was always some catch. After an unknown period of time, she actually managed to catch a few. These few fish were enough for her to have a full meal. At the same time, she didn't forget to taunt Ed Stafford a bit. She hoped he was cold, hungry, and had no success at all. Then she hurried back to camp to start a fire and heat oil. The next moment, Ness was eating her first meal in 3 days. Although there were no seasonings at all, in the face of hunger, these were simply not problems. In the blink of an eye, the 4th day arrived. To better plan his onward route, Ed Stafford climbed to the top of a mountain early in the morning to survey the terrain. At the same time, Ness also set off early. During the journey, she lost her footing and slid down the hillside. To make matters worse, she fell into a patch of stinging nettles. She believed everyone was quite familiar with the potency of these things. Ness felt her skin burning fiercely, as if being pricked by needles, and so, the two of them spent another day scrambling through the jungle. Soon, evening approached. Just as Ed Stafford was busy looking for a campsite, he noticed wisps of smoke rising above the jungle. Following the smoke to investigate, he indeed found signs of human activity. It was very clear. Apart from himself and Ness, there wouldn't be anyone else here. So Ed Stafford immediately showed himself and went over to greet Ness. Ness quickly realized that this guy had come to mooch off her fire. However, given their many years of friendship, she didn't refuse. Later in their conversation, they both expressed that they were like family. Winning or losing wasn't important in the face of familial affection. Unexpectedly, early the next morning before dawn, while Ed Stafford was still fast asleep, Ness quietly left the shelter. By the time Ed Stafford woke up after daybreak and opened his eyes, he found that Ness was already gone from the campsite. Although Ness was currently in the lead, her physical fitness, compared to Ed Stafford's, was still considerably lacking. Moreover, Ed Stafford was feeling a surge of competitive spirit, and his steps were full of vigor. He finally caught up with Ness just before reaching the finish line, and successfully overtook her. At this point, only a few hundred meters remained to the suspension bridge. The final challenge before them was to climb to the top of the mountain. Neither dared to slack off, as the gap between them was very small. In the end, Ed Stafford, relying on his astonishing physical fitness, was the first to reach the finish line. Then, within a few minutes, Ness also arrived close behind. From this point on, it's likely Ed Stafford will never believe a relative's sweet talk again. This competition successfully concluded with Ed Stafford's victory.